Hello, this is That Rob Human, and this is part 12 of the Tabletop Playground modding development series. In this episode, we're going to dive back a little bit into scripting. This is a slight interlude, I suppose, where we kind of establish some basics of UI. You can add custom UI to your objects, like buttons or text inputs or things like that, to your objects. And I'm going to blitz through adding a UI to our cuboid real quick. The reason why I'm going to blitz through this is actually on the next episode. We're going to dive into it in a much more encompassing way, using a slightly more advanced syntax that create TTPG package enable, which is why we did this TSX template. But I wanted to establish a little bit of groundwork on utilizing the basic vanilla, air quotes that you can't see, UI system so that you have a little bit more context, and if you don't necessarily want to use the JSX syntax, there's an option here. Additionally, I will also mention, and this actually just happened today, a member of the Discord community for Tabletop Playground, Banbury, actually put out a library that does a similar thing to the JSX syntax, but without the JSS syntax. I think he called it a builder pattern. We'll probably dive into that in an additional episode, so like 2 episodes hence, because I think it's a great little alternative, and I don't want to leave it in the dust. So we'll touch on that as an alternative pattern to UI building. But for now, let's actually go ahead and get into our cuboid, and we'll just start state here. And I haven't changed it from where we left it off on the original object here. So if I pick it up, I'll take ownership of it, drop it, revoke ownership, and all that jazz. So this is the script as we left it. And I'm actually going to ditch most of this because we don't actually need it for now. You know what? Actually, you know what? Let's keep it. Because I will ditch the on grab and on release because that's not actually something we necessarily want here. So I'll make sure it's unrevoked here, and we'll reload. Need to actually run yarn watch so it updates. And we'll reload the scripting, and you'll see that grabbing it no longer has an effect. Cool. But this take ownership and revoke ownership context menu item still there. But let's say we don't necessarily want to have this on the right click menu. We want to have a button because buttons are cool. So to do that, we can actually get rid of a lot of this. We can get rid of all that. And we can get rid of all that. So these are now a little bit more pure functions, right? This actually takes ownership and revokes ownership and does all the necessary side effects to do that. And it doesn't do the custom action juggling. Cool. A bit more utilitarian that way. We can ditch this on custom action. We don't need that anymore. And there's kind of, let's see, there's a couple ways we can do this here. So to begin with, let's create a new UI element, and this is a class from the API. And again, if I have the where is it? Yeah, you're gonna see my YouTube channel. Oh well. If you take a look at the, I think it's UI element, this is the class that I just have invoked here. This is what lets you attach UI to your objects, and it also takes in a widget, which we'll get to in a second. And the widget is actually the kind of meat and potatoes of the UI. Each UI element, not UI element, but each widget really is the best name for it. A UI element gets attached to a game component, and widgets get added to UI elements. It's a little counterintuitive because in the HTML world we refer to the widgets as elements, so I might be using those interchangeably a little bit here. But the widget is kind of the thing. So there's like a button widget or a text object widget or something like that. But the UI element is what is kind of the container for all the widgets on an object. A slightly confusing terminology, but what can you do? So we have our UI, and we're actually going to refer to it as UI. And let's do UI, and I'm going to set up a couple things here right off the bat because this is what I like to do. I'm going to set the scale to 0.5. I kind of do this to all of my UI elements for reasons. This kind of changes the resolution. If you leave it at 1.0, a lot of people don't like how it looks because it looks really pixelated. So a good way around that for me is just scale it down by half and make everything twice as big. You can go smaller, so you can scale it down to 0.25 and make every element 4 times as big, but you get really diminishing returns and it eats up a lot of memory. Well, not a lot, but like, you know, it basically renders to a texture. That's how Unreal does that. So it takes up texture memory. I wouldn't go much smaller than 0.25, but if you really want sharp and good looking UI, you might want to do that. I find 0.5 is fine. It doesn't have to be as pretty as a lot of people seem to think it is. It's more important that it works and it is lightweight enough that it can work. So I am of the opinion you get diminishing returns. Anyways, I'm going to set some anchors here, and this is where the anchor kind of serves as a UI expands. Where's the anchor point? We can dive into that a little bit as we get into that, but I started off usually at 0.5 by 0.5, which means that it will expand in all directions equally. If you set, say, anchor X to 0, the UI will expand to the right. It's kind of hard to explain verbally. I'll explain it as we dive into that a little bit more and get more content in there. So, and I will also do position equals new vector. A vector, of course, representing a 3D coordinate. So I think 0, 3, 0. That might be right. We'll find out. Experimentation is good here. So this just basically says where in relation to the object will the UI live. You can also set the rotation, so like UI.rotation equals new rotator, and you can say pitch, yaw, and roll. If you want it to like be tilted up 10 degrees, you can do that. But in our case, we actually want it in its default behavior, which is to point up. That's fine. There's a couple other things in here that we'll go over a little bit, but we'll get there. The other thing I will do is UI.widget. The widget is the primary object that the, again, widget, element, right. It's kind of the first outermost widget that the UI uses. It's kind of a wrapper. You have a couple different options on what you can actually use here, but I'm actually going to use horizontal box because that's kind of the easiest one to use here. And so we set the widget to a new horizontal box. Now, this is fine. You could do that. And then you can be like, add child. And we can be like, new button dot set, I don't know, set text to click me. And that should work. I don't see why that wouldn't work. Let's take a look. It might not actually show up here because I don't necessarily have my position in the right place. Oh, we need to actually add it to the object, of course. Object.add UI. I always get tripped up on that. We reload. Oh, and it looks like I actually have the wrong coordinate. That's okay. Let's try that again, shall we? Cool, so we have this button, and you can click this button. And it's 3 units off the ground here, and there it is. That's pretty much how that works. Now, obviously, we want this button to do something. So let's do dot on clicked. I don't actually know. Yeah, see, it's not going to actually let me do it that way. So this is where we kind of have an issue. This is a bit of a JavaScript pattern where, so you have this new button, and the set text actually returns the button. So you can chain these things together, which is what I've done here. So we've got new horizontal box dot add child, and the add child returns the horizontal box as well. So it gets assigned to UI widget. The issue here is that the onClicked doesn't actually return the object. It won't return the button. So what we need to do is actually pull this out of here to say const the button equals new button dot set text to that. And that's functionally the same thing. That being said, now what I can do is I can do like the button dot on click dot add. And again, this is just like the event bus. The event in this case is it fires when this button is clicked. So we'll add a callback for this, and this is button, and this is the button that is being clicked. So you get a built-in reference to the widget, and then player. Now, this actually lies a little bit. This player might actually end up being undefined, and that's because you can actually trigger the click manually. So like it can be like the button dot. I think I can do that. I think there's a way to, might actually be another callback there, but there are some circumstances where the onClicked gets triggered or can get triggered in atypical ways. So this player might actually be undefined. Let me see if I can actually pull that up real quick. Text widget base button. Where is it? OnClicked. Okay, so the player who clicked this button isn't actually that. There are some widget events that the player might end up being undefined. Not important for now. Anyways. So let's actually have it so that when the button is clicked, we do take ownership player. So instead of having the right-click menu, now we have this button that says, when we click me, I take ownership of it. So it changes the color, and I'm now the owner, and all that. Cool. Well, the issue now is we need to do the revoke. And there's a couple ways that we can do this. We can be like, there's a couple different ways we can do this. Let's do handle on click, and we'll define that. Handle on click equals And there's a very good reason why I'm actually externalizing that. Okay. And we'll do another one that is, well, we'll change that to onClick take. Okay. And we'll do an onClick revoke. Do revoke ownership for this player. Okay. So we have our two handlers, as it were, and just like I did with the special actions, I can kind of do a little bit of swappity-doo-dah here. So I will say during the handle on click take, I'll say the button dot onClicked.remove handle onClickTake. That basically says stop listening to this event for this function. So I can then add the button.onClick.add handle onClickRevoke. So now when you click onClick handle take, when you click the button, we can basically, it'll say, okay, now stop listening to this event and start listening to this event with this handler instead. We can actually do the same thing here, except we swap them. Remove and add. That's a nice way to be like how you kind of juggle your event handlers. In fact, let's actually change the text of this to take ownership. And likewise, we can do like the button.setText revoke ownership. So now the text will change along with it. So I can that take ownership or revoke ownership. And you'll notice that when I have ownership, it still has the take ownership and it has that little state, initialized state stutter. You can do the same thing like we did before, where it will check the ownership before it determines what is the current state of the thing first. So we can be like, let's actually do this. We'll pull this up here. Nope, doesn't like that. That's because I defined the function later. Anyways, so let's pull this down here. We don't need that for now. We can be like, if object dot get player owning slot is not equal to -1, and we say the button dot set text is take ownership. Button dot onClicked dot add handle onClick take, right? Otherwise, that means this is owned. We'll do revoke ownership. And that can actually go away. So this should be fine. A bit of a bug there. Oh. Did I do that right? Oh, if it's equal to -1. That makes more sense. So now it should remember from reload to reload. Cool. Okay. So that's our initial state. Cool. But again, we have that same problem where you can have anyone revoke ownership because the visibility of this UI element is such that everyone can see it. So there's a way we can get around this that is slightly better than the right-click menu. Now, if I were to change players, I'm now green, but I can still revoke ownership. Sort of. Well, it's got a little bit of confusion going on because of this, right? But it's still running. In an ideal world, if I'm not the owner of it, I should not even be able to see that revoke ownership UI. I shouldn't be able to, I can't click it. But, anyways, the real way to get around this, by the way, just so it doesn't juggle the UI state unnecessarily, what I could do is actually have this return a Boolean. In that case, we'll always return true, return false. Okay? So I can do if, which means if this function did in fact do the thing, then modify this stuff. Otherwise, don't. I mean, this is kind of redundant too, because it will always return true, but for the sake of consistency, let's do this. All right, so basically it says, do revoke ownership. If it succeeded, then it will update the button. So that kind of gets rid of that, the button shifting unnecessarily. Anyways, so we got this bit of a UI visibility, like I'm red, but I can still see this revoke button. I don't want to be able to see that, or I don't want other people to be able to see it when they're not the owner. The way around this is something that's actually really neat. You can set permissions on UI. So to do this, I'll say UI dot players equals new player permission. And let's actually extract this to perm, const perm equals this. And we'll say perm dot add player p. So basically it says, you know, just add this player to this set of permissions. And now, in fact, I'll need to actually do one other thing. We'll do object dot update UI. That is, when you change a UI parameter after the UI has been added, you'll need to update it. So that's a thing. And likewise, we can do, when you revoke it, we want to reset the permissions. So I can do like const perm equals new player permissions. And we can just UI.players equals perm object.update UI. This basically just means, yeah, only a given set of players can see this. So if I reload scripting here, I'm going to revoke owner. Right, I gotta revoke ownership as the owner. Cool. So I'm going to say take ownership, and I'm going to change my player. You'll see that the button goes away. But if I change over to the green slot, I get this back. And I can revoke the ownership. And then if I change players to, say, the blue slot, well, this becomes visible. Now I can take ownership, and if I change players to the green slot, I don't have the option to click this. So player permissions, which is... Stop wiggling. The player permissions, which is access through the UI.players property, is a good way to kind of be... to add some visibility to it. To be more discretionary in visibility. I'm sure you get the idea. So I just wanted to mention that as a thing here. Now, that's kind of the basics of UI. You create a UI element, you add a bunch of widgets to it. I guess I could get into... yeah, you know what? Let's do that too. So we're going to add another element here. The label equals new text widget. Is it text or text widget? I think it's text. It's text. So let's say I do the label dot set text p dot get name. Cool. And down here, when we revoke it, we'll clear the name. And ooh, let's even get a little bit fancier and be like the label dot set color. See? Here we go. And let's actually just the label dot set color, set text color rather, player dot get player color. So if you're wondering what this actually does, and I will revoke ownership first, so we have a clean state. I'll reload the scripting, and when I hit click take ownership, it should show my name. It should. Oh, you know why? Because I didn't actually add it as a child. So let me revoke ownership first. There we go. So add child the label. Horizontal boxes and vertical boxes can have multiple children. So we'll get into that in the next little bit here when we talk about the JSX version. You'll kind of see that a little bit more intuitively. So this horizontal box has two children, the button and the label. So we'll reload scripting. So if I hit take ownership, there's my name. And this is kind of where that anchor property that I mentioned before, or maybe in the previous episode, where you'll see how it expands because the UI got larger, and it expands horizontally from the center. May not necessarily be what you want. So I'm going to change the anchor of this, the anchor X, to 0. And we'll reload scripting. And you'll see that it doesn't move anymore, it expands from here. So the anchor is at the 0 point of the position. And I can tweak that to be like -2 for the starting position. That's the wrong axis. And we'll do -3 there. We'll reload, and now it kind of, but you'll notice that this left side is now the anchor of the element. You can get into a bit more fanciness when it comes to that, but 9 times out of 10 you probably want to just set your anchors to 0.5 on both set of circumstances. On both axes, rather. In most circumstances. Okay. So that's permissions, and that's a little bit of basics of UI. Yeah, so I suppose we could dive into. Let me take a second here. Let me get my avians in a linear formation. Yeah, so I've been prattling on here for about almost 30 minutes, and this kind of touches on some of the UI stuff. I'm not going to cover everything or every discrete element or widget. I would highly recommend checking out the API docs. There's a lot of good things there. In the next episode, we'll actually dive into a slightly more practical use case for UI, where I'll make a game component as though I were actually making a game. That is a good use case for UI, and we'll integrate a lot of the stuff that we touched on here, like permissions and everything like that, and we'll talk about UI as different presentation styles of UI and all things like that, and we'll touch on the more advanced syntax using JSX and TTPG. So stay tuned for that episode coming up.